Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video, we are going to see how to configure ADDS sites. So in this lesson, we'll see some of the following topics. What are ADDS sites? Why we need to implement additional sites? And how the replication works between different sites? And what is the ISTG? And the overview of SRV records, and how the client computers locate the domain controller within the sites, and moving the domain controller between sites. So first we'll see what are ADDS sites. So sites identify network location with fast, reliable network connections. Basically, when the computer tries to authenticate over the network, it will try to find the nearest the sites which will have the domain controller configured with the Active Directory and all the other services with fast and reliable network connections. And sites are associated with the subnet object, so that each site will have a different subnet, and based on that the servers or the domain controllers can be configured. And the sites are used to manage the replication when domain controllers are separated by slow and expensive link. Let's say if there is a multiple sites and you have a domain controller in each sites, and you might have a different topology for the replication between the domain controllers from one site to another site based on the connections. And if you have an expensive link, or let's say if there is a slow connection between some sites, and you may have a different route or the topology for the faster replication. And the service localization, that includes the domain controller authentication, which is like when any user tries to authenticate or log into the system, it will contact the domain controller for the authentication and the authorization, so that in case if you do not have the local domain controller, then it will be the long call to get the authentication. But let's say if you have a local domain controller, it will be easy, and it will be faster as well for the users to access the services or the application within the site. And from that site domain controller to another site, the replication will happen. And why we need to implement additional sites. So creating additional sites when there is a slow link that separate the part of the network, and a part of the network has enough users to warrant hosting the domain controller or the services in that location. And you want to control the service localization, and you want to control the replication between domain controllers. So when you have multiple sites, you need to have the additional domain controllers in each sites, so that that domain controllers will take care of the authentication and accessing services, everything within the site. And from there it will replicate the database to the other site domain controller. Since users can move into a different location as well, so when they move into a different location, and when they try to log into their system, access their application, then it will be provisioned from the local domain controller. And how the replication works between sites. So let's see how the replication works within the site and between the sites. So if the replication within the site means, we can assume it will be faster, and there will not be any connections over the WAN, so that it will not be expensive. and it will be highly reliable network links, and it does not compress any traffic since it's happening within the site, and the users a change notification mechanism. And if the replication happening between the sites, then we can assume it will occur higher cost, and there will be a limited bandwidth since it is through the WAN, the internet, the traffic will be happening, and it may be unreliable network links. We not sure like when it will go down also, and it has the ability to compress the replication and send the traffic. It occurs on a configured schedule. So when the replication happening between the sites from one domain controller to the another domain controller in the different sites, there will be a scheduled time. So during that time, the replication will happen between the sites and the domain controller, so that all the database will be in a sync, and all the domain controller will have the same copy of the database. And we can configure for immediate and urgent replication. So on demand, if we are making some changes, and if we need to make it work immediately, then we need to run the manual replication so that the changes will be applied to the domain controller, and the users can access it immediately. So what is the ISTG? So ISTG means it is inter-site topology generator, which establish the connection object between the sites. So only one domain controller in each Active Directory sites will have the ISTG role at any given time, so that between those the domain controller that have the ISTG role will happen the replication. And the overview of the SRV records. So the domain controller will have the SRV records. So let me quickly show you the domain controller's record. So I have logged into the domain controller that has the 2016, and I'm just opening the DNS, which is the domain name system. So here I can just expand the FLZ, forward lookup zone, and under the domain, which is the adatum.com, I can see the sites that are configured. So here I have the default first site. So if I wanted to configure additional sites, then I need to go to the Active Directory sites and services. So here under sites, I can see the sites. So by default, we can see the first default site. And let's say I have a site in a different location. For example, I'm just putting London HQ. So when you create a sites, you need to make sure it is linked to the sites appropriate, and you need to have the subnets, and you need to install one or more domain controller in that location. So now I have the different site called London HQ, and once I deploy the domain controller, I can add the servers in this location so that it will be listed. And now if I go to the DNS manager, let me just close and open the DNS. In forward lookup zone, adatum.com sites. So now I can see the new site that I have created. So the SRV records, so all domain controller in the domain will have the SRV records. And to create the SRV records, we can just go to this location, and we can right click and choose the other new records. And from here, you can just scroll down and find the name called service location, which is the SRV record. And you can click on create. So here you have to specify to which service you are going to use this. So let's say HTTP service, it will be a TCP protocol, and you need to specify the priority and the port number. By default, it's 80, and the host offering the service. And then you can create the SRV record. Okay, so next, how the client computers locate the domain controller within sites. So the process for locating the domain controller will be as follows. So the new client queries for all the domain controller in the domain. So basically, in the computer properties, will have the DNS configured. So based on that, it will tries to reach out all those DNS within the sites or the network, and the client computer attempts an LDAP ping to find all the domain controllers. So it will tries to contact or ping the LDAP, the domain controller, whichever is available. Let's say you have a primary and secondary. If the primary is down, it will tries to contact the secondary, and if the secondary is reachable, then it will authenticate. And first domain controller responds. So based on the primary and secondary, so if the first one is reachable, then it will contact the first domain controller. And the client queries for all domain controller in the site. The client attempt an LDAP ping to find all the domain controllers in the site. The client forms an affinity. So basically, the client will tries to contact all the the domain controller available or reachable within the network, and it will use the first one which is configured. Okay, so that's it in this video, and I'll see you in the next. Thank you.